We had a chance last week to quickly react to the Chicago Bears schedule coming out on Thursday, but now that we've had a little more time to sit with it, look at the opponents and the games, there are some real quirks in this schedule that should play well into the Chicago Bears' favor.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lorin Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Locked On Bears. You can like Locked On Bears on Facebook. Join the Locked On Bears Facebook group for even more Bears talk. And make sure you hit that subscribe button on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel to keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We appreciate everyone who tunes in every day. Our everydayers here on the Locked On Podcast Network truly help keep this ship running. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And on the show today, we take a closer look, not at this Bears schedule in terms of the game by game, big picture stuff, but more a little bit intimate on some of the quirks within this schedule. On Thursday we had Larry from Bears Talk Underground join us to kind of talk big picture as the schedule had just kind of come out, reacting to the games and the different stretches that might seem most important for this Bears team. And we talked about, what the floor and the ceiling of that schedule might look like. But now I want to look a little bit more closely at how this whole thing is shaped and comes together in three particular ways. One, I want to go more in depth on the quarterbacks on this Bears schedule that ultimately ends up playing out a little bit easier than we might think. It's a little bit different way to look at it than just strength of schedule, but more so the types of quarterbacks that the Bears are going to face. And it's not a particularly difficult stretch of opposing passers under center. We'll also talk about the amount of rest built into the Bears schedule after ESPN analytics reveal the Bears are going to get more rest between games over the course of a season than pretty much any other team in the league, including despite having two Thursday night games. And I also like some of the other interesting quirks about, the bye week, the long weeks off before divisional games, and just sort of the strength and weaknesses points within the actual schedule that make it an otherwise favorable general structure for what the Bears will be facing this season. But I think what stands out to most to me right away, we touched on this briefly with Larry, but I kind of realized over the weekend, we didn't get enough time to go through everything. I mean, Larry and I could have talked for hours on this Bears schedule. We often do on his Bears Talk Underground podcast, literally talk for hours about this team. But we were kind of jumping around and going through different things that stood out as we were sort of reacting to that schedule live. And it really is, it's not just the quality of the opponents and trying to predict wins and losses, but more so the quality of the quarterbacks really go a long way in terms of what the Bears are going to be facing on this year's schedule. That, of course, when you have the Kansas City Chiefs in week 3, Patrick Mahomes kind of takes the cake as the top quarterback in the NFL, and of course, then the top quarterback on the Chicago Bears schedule. But beyond that, it's Justin Herbert and Derek Carr and maybe Deshaun Watson, and that's about it for the quarterbacks that really, even scare you feels like a strong word when we talk about somebody like Derek Carr, right? And same with Russell Wilson. The number of quarterbacks that you feel like, man, the Bears are going to have a hard time keeping up with that QB in this matchup is so few. And it doesn't mean that then the Bears are guaranteed to beat all these other teams that don't have the quarterbacks that scare you, but this is such a quarterback-driven sport that oftentimes that can be, I don't want to say a better measurement than strength of schedule, but a more interesting way to look at it, right? You talk about the Green Bay Packers in week 1 and week 18, and we don't know how good Jordan Love is going to be. Certainly, we don't expect Jordan Love to be crisp and sharp right away in week 1 when the Bears open the season at Soldier Field against the Green Bay Packers. Maybe by week 18 in the last game of the season, we get a different Jordan Love that's a little bit more seasoned, a little bit more calm, comfortable, controlled in this Packers offense and feeling a little bit better about who he is. But at least for the first game, Jordan Love is going to be a major wild card that could either go really well in the Bears' favor because he's just not ready or in over his head or whatever, or it could go well in the Packers' favor that the Bears don't really have a lot to prepare for from Jordan Love. You get week 2, Tampa Bay. Baker Mayfield is the veteran there. Kyle Trask is the young guy there. Neither one of them scares you as a particularly big threat at QB that's going to out-duel Justin Fields for the course of a whole game. Then it's the Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes. Yeah. Russell Wilson with the Broncos becomes a real wild card then in week 4 because, things did not go well last year with Nathaniel Hackett. Will Sean Payton be able to just instantly unlock that? He certainly has good wide receivers there, and they invested in the offensive line and more of the offense around Russell Wilson. So, in theory, there's a path here where Wilson is better this season and more like the Russell Wilson of the past, and that becomes a very difficult quarterback opponent on the schedule. There's also a chance where, for whatever reason, Russell Wilson is just not ever going to become the same quarterback that he was before, and he's just past his peak and is just going to still struggle at times with that team despite a new coach and despite an improved team around him. So it's hard to say right now that you're super scared of Russell Wilson, but there's a possibility there. You go to the Commanders in week 5 and it's Sam Howell, 5th round pick from last year. It's not really threatening you. Kirk Cousins with the Vikings on there twice, of course. We know what Kirk Cousins is and isn't at this point, right? I mean, Kirk Cousins can win them some games. Kirk Cousins need things to be going well around them. They have had to dismantle parts of that team, so we're not sure exactly what it's going to look like. Kirk Cousins is a very solid NFL quarterback, and I'm not here to come on and say, oh, Cousins is terrible and therefore those will be easy games for the Bears. Absolutely not. But Kirk Cousins is not the type of Patrick Mahomes, Justin Herbert, Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts type of quarterback that you see on the schedule and go, oh boy, we're in for some elite quarterbacking for 4 quarters that's really going to test every aspect of this Bears defense. And just to sort of, we don't need to go through every single quarterback, but, Jimmy Garoppolo with the Raiders, mixed bag. Herbert with the Chargers, really solid, scary quarterback for sure. It's Mahomes and it's Herbert, but then it's like Carr, Bryce Young, Jared Goff, and then Watson maybe, Kyler Murray. He's going to be on a bad team. He can be a scary quarterback, but he's going to be on a bad team. So it's kind of a question of how threatened are you by the Cardinals then in week 17 or week 16. Week 17 with the Falcons, it's Desmond Ridder not necessarily scaring you either. So it's there are 2 games where you're pretty certain there's going to be really good quarterback play that you're going against. The other 16 weeks, 15 games, you're not certain how great the quarterback play is going to be. It's 15 other quarterbacks that have played well in some cases, but still struggled in other cases, or some quarterbacks that just haven't played that well. And it feels like each and every game then can give you an opportunity for this Bears defense to not be completely overblown, right? That we know this defensive line right now is a weakness. We know this defense was the biggest weakness last season. They were the worst defense in the NFL. They're going to have an easier quarterback slate this season, and maybe that can give them a little bit more confidence and you then a little more confidence in them to be able to keep Justin Fields and the Bears in some of these games. It should help that the Bears will have more rest between games than any other team in the league and historically than any other team we've seen in a long time. We'll look at how this rest breaks down for the Bears and what kind of advantage that can provide next on Locked On Bears. The Locked On Bears podcast is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And right now on FanDuel, you can already start to bet on this upcoming Bears schedule. The Week 1 game between the Bears and the Green Bay Packers already has odds up, with the Bears as 1.5-point home favorites so far over the Green Bay Packers. I know that line has shifted a little bit since it first came out, but the Bears still the slight home favorites there with a -126 money line and an over-under at 44.5. You can also bet on how the rest of the season will go for the Bears in terms of where they will finish in the division rankings, perhaps on Matt Eberflus as a potential coach of the year or Justin Fields as a potential MVP candidate, and so much more. Not just football, but NBA playoffs or NHL playoffs as well on FanDuel. There's no better place to bet on all of your favorite action on America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get that no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NFL and NBA. Right away when the Bears schedule came out and we saw 2 Thursday night games, I think there was immediately some like, oh man, right? Like Thursday night football kind of sucks. And those Thursday night games are then a short week of preparation for the Bears. It's 4 days from Sunday to Thursday to try and get your team ready for a new opponent. And that's a tight turnaround where teams barely practice, if really at all. It's more like walkthroughs. Guys are still sort of banged up from the week before, and you're not really feeling like they're 100% recovered for that game. And it's like, man, the Bears are going to be kind of stressed to have to do that turnaround twice. This is the first season, I think, that the league is letting teams do, or is forcing teams, is probably a better phrase than letting teams, but forcing teams to have to do 2 Thursday night games in one season. So your immediate thought might be like, man, the Bears are going to be running a little bit ragged as a result of that. But ESPN Analytics actually crunched the numbers on teams' schedules to sort of see, okay, like how much rest are you going to have in between games for each team? And are some teams going to get more or less rest than the other teams in order to then perhaps have an advantage or a disadvantage? And it turns out that despite having 2 Thursday night games, the Bears have the most, or the most rest differential is the key phrase here, between them and their opponents of any team and their schedule this season. We saw Brian Burke from ESPN Analytics tweeted out this graph that I'm showing on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, but it's titled the best net rest differential since 2002. And basically what Brian Burke said is the Bears will have nearly 2 weeks more rest than their opponents this season, which is tied for the most that any team has had since the league realigned in 2002. It's tied with the 2022 Bills, the Bills of last year, and then the 2011 Lions. The graph isn't even necessarily like super well delineated. You know, like it's net rest differentials on a scale of 0 to 13 on the bottom. I believe those are in terms of days. And so like the Bears are up at like 12 or 13 days more. I think it's 13 days more rest than their opponents. And what that looks like is then like the number of games between them and their opponents on the schedule. So, you know, if the Bears are playing a team, say on Sunday, that just played their last game on Monday night, the day before, then the Bears will have one more rest day than that team will have before their next game, right? So if the Bears play Sunday to Sunday, but their opponent played Monday to Sunday, there's a +1 then in net rest differential. The Bears gain more rest before that matchup than their opponent will. And the key here, I think, is because of the 2 Thursday night games, that when you look at like the schedule, it's when the Bears play the Commanders, for example, on Thursday, and then later they play the Panthers on Thursday, they'll have the same amount of rest before that game as the Commanders and the Panthers. So it's not like they're getting less rest than their opponents for that week. But because they have those 2 Thursday night games, they will have those extended breaks then between that Thursday night game and the following Sunday to prepare for the following, you know, the next opponents. And the quick math in my head says, you know, Friday, Saturday, Sunday is 3 additional days of rest before their next game, before their next opponent, twice on the schedule. They get those 3. So that's 6 days of extra rest built in, that they'll have 3 more days of rest when they play the Vikings after the first Thursday night game and the Lions after the second Thursday night game than their opponents. So while they will be short on rest for those Thursday night games, their opponents on Thursday will have the same amount of short rest. But then the following opponent that they play after those Thursday night games will not have as low, or will not have the extra rest that the Bears then got from having played that Thursday game in the first place. Plus then, you know, you have the bye week giving the Bears a bunch of rest before their Lions game there. They'll have a net positive rest before they go into that game against the Lions, because the Lions, you know, they don't have their bye week in week 13. It's a different week of the season. So the Lions won't be coming off of a bye, but the Bears will be. So they'll have significantly more rest than the Lions will in those games. Certainly there may be games where the Bears are playing a team that is coming off a Thursday night game and will have more rest than the Bears in those games. But over the course of the season, as ESPN Analytics breaks down for us here, the Bears will have a total of 13 more days of rest than their opponents will in each of those individual games. And that should bode well for the Bears to potentially, I don't want to say like prevent injuries, but perhaps overcome injuries, have more time to recover from injuries, and have guys just be a little bit sharper, a little bit closer to the tops of their games when they're playing some of these opponents there on the schedule. It's worth noting too that on this ESPN Analytics chart, there are 4 other teams that have a lot of rest this season: the Jets, Commanders, Titans, and Browns. I have a feeling that that's more strongly correlated with Thursday night games and bye weeks, and sort of some of it's just luck of the draw on where your schedule is, and what kind of opponent situation you're facing and what kind of games your opponents have. But still, this Bears team should be in a very good position. I think that works really well, especially, for a team like this that's got a lot of young guys and a lot of rookie and second-year players that are still adjusting to the speed of the NFL game. Certainly, it would be a benefit for a very veteran team if you have old guys that are going to need even more rest, that maybe the Bears could be in a slightly better position to handle less rest because a lot of their young players have less tread and wear on the tires. But I think it is good, too, to just, in a season like this, to be able to maintain some of that longevity. That this is not the year that the Bears want to grind everybody down and squeeze as much as they can out of every individual player in order to go as far as they can in the playoffs. Of course, they want to win as many games as they can, but no one is expecting this year's Bears team to go on a deep, deep playoff run. I think the hope is to push for a playoff spot. That should be the expectations. Try and make the playoffs and be happy if you get there, but realistically, they might not. This might not be a playoff team. I don't know if we should be disappointed if they don't make the playoffs. I don't know if that's reasonable expectations, just given where this team still stands right now. They need to be better than last year, but it's not about, okay, can we save these guys for the end of the year to go on a playoff run? They can afford to sort of, push things through here, but at the same time, like, they don't need to really put their nose to the grindstone and make everybody play through as much as they can to try and win as many games as they can right now. They can take it. I don't want to say take it easy this season because it's not tanking, right? It's not, you still want to win as many games as possible, but being able to sort of have that rest to keep these guys to feel like you're not burning them out this season. So they're not then using all offseason to have to recover from such a grueling all-in 2023 season. You can, I guess, take it a little bit easier. It feels weird to say that, right? It's not take it easy, but maybe it's a little bit less stress. Maybe it's a little bit high, a little bit less pressure and expectations to push through every little thing to get as far into the playoffs as possible. No, let's just have everybody get better and have some extra rest along the way. I think that'll be good for every player involved for the Bears team. I think there's a lot of good in this Bears schedule for this Bears team in particular that relates to the rest and the quarterbacks, and I think just the structure of the schedule. And I want to go through some of the other quirks that we didn't have time to get through when we broke down the schedule last week with Larry. Next on Locked On Bears. There's a lot of little ways you can slice and dice this Bears schedule to really sort of see some clear advantages here that are just a result of luck and the schedule makers putting games in certain orders and mathematically everything sort of fitting together to put the Bears in a spot that you can feel pretty good about schedule-wise. And I think there's a few aspects of this that I wanted to get into that I think part of it relates to the rest, but part of it is just sort of the order of operations that just kind of happens to be that way. So like when I look at this schedule in particular, one thing that stands out that the Bears do not face a single opponent who is coming off of a bye week. I think they face at least one team that's coming off a Thursday night game, but none of their games will be against a team coming off of the bye week. Every team will have played an opponent the weekend before the Bears play them. The Bears, of course, will have that week 13 to prepare for the Detroit Lions in week 14. So an extra 7 days to come out of the bye week, fix some things, and play against what could be the best team in your division this season in the Detroit Lions. We saw last year, out of the bye week, the Bears came out and played the Philadelphia Eagles really, really well, a team that went to the Super Bowl. The Bears scared them, and the Bears were a 3-win team last season and put some fear into the hearts of the Philadelphia Eagles and made that a close game. The Bears have a chance to do that against the Lions, and no team will then have a chance to do that against the Bears. Every single team on that schedule has a bye week somewhere else in the schedule that they're not playing the Bears after the bye week, and that's a great way to keep that rest advantage up, but also to not have a team have extra time to be able to sit down, dissect what you do and how you play and how to stop Justin Fields and all that stuff, and instead they've just got to do the normal regular weeks, turn around, and the Bears can find themselves with some sort of advantage in that way. Along with that, right, you look at the schedule and where the Bears' breaks are in terms of the rest that they have. It's before a divisional game all 3 times. Thursday night against the Commanders, and then it's the Vikings the following day where you have the 10 days mini bye week, as Matt Eberflus called it last season, to prepare for the Vikings and have some of that extra time built in there. You go against the Carolina Panthers in week 10 on Thursday night, and then it's another 10 days before they play the Detroit Lions in week 11, that mini bye week to prepare and get ready for Detroit. And then you get at least extra time before both Detroit Lions games. Like, not only is all of your time before divisional opponents, but it's also before perhaps your best divisional opponents this season. I mean, I call it a sneak shot on the Green Bay Packers, but like, we don't know what they're going to be. And the betting odds at FanDuel, for example, say that the Packers, I think, are third in NFC North odds right now. I'm scrolling down just to confirm that. Yeah, right now the Packers are third in the NFC North odds, tied with the Chicago Bears in terms of odds to win the NFC North. The odds makers at FanDuel say Lions are first, Vikings are second, Packers and Bears are currently tied for third/fourth place. And so you've got mini bye weeks before your two games against the odds makers' best team in your division, and a mini bye week between the odds makers' second best team in your division. Oh, and you play the Packers in week 1, and you sort of have a mini bye week then between your last preseason game and your first regular season game. So there's extra time to prepare for the Packers in week 1, the Vikings in week 6, the Lions in week 11, and the Lions in week 14. Those divisional games are the most important games on the schedule. Sure, they're not all the best teams on your schedule. You know, the Chiefs and maybe the Chargers and stuff. We can argue about how close the Lions are to those teams, but like, they are some of the most important games on the schedule, and the Bears ultimately get a pretty favorable setup through no control of their own to be able to prepare the best that they can for those teams. The other part of the schedule that I think is really important is how it ends, but also just the way that the quality of opponents on paper in May are structured and set up to be, I think, good for where the Bears are. So, of course, the end of your schedule, we talked about it a little bit with Larry. The last 3 games, Cardinals, Falcons, and then at Packers. On paper, the Cardinals are looking like one of the worst teams in football. The odds seem to agree with that at this stage of the game, projected to be around the number 1 overall pick, potentially, with their own pick and the Texans' pick from trading down. Even though they have Kyler Murray, they're just a bit of a mess of a football team right now. And then the Atlanta Falcons were picking in the top 10 this year. Still have the same quarterback that's not, we don't know how good Desmond Ridder will be, but hasn't been necessarily the go-to guy. And they don't strike me as a team that made this massive, massive leap forward. It doesn't mean that they're going to be terrible, but perhaps one of the more winnable games on the Bears schedule compared to some of, on the spectrum of like the worst teams and the best teams the Bears will play. The Falcons are a little bit farther down there. And then it's at Green Bay Packers in week 18. And whether the Bears are pushing for a playoff spot then or not, you have an opportunity to end this season strong. And carry that momentum either into the postseason or into 2024, right? To be able to end on a strong note and to feel like this young team started to put more and more of this together down the stretch that you can then carry into the offseason and look at that as evidence that things are working and things are trending in the right direction. There's something to be said about how you finish these seasons, whether you're in the postseason or not, and it's a good spot for the Bears to be in, even though it's not a good spot for my voice right now, as you've been able to hear today and on yesterday's podcast. It's been a little bit of a struggle. I don't think I'm sick. I'm just halfway losing my voice a little bit here. But the other thing I wanted to point out quickly was even the difficult stretch of the schedule that I think is the 4 road games in 5 weeks: Chargers, at Saints, home versus the Panthers, at Lions, at Vikings. Like, I think those 4 road games are all going to be tough. 2 divisional games, 2 potential playoff teams. But at least you have the Panthers game in there as another should be relatively easier opponent on paper to give you a break, that you're not going to lose 5 games in a row in that stretch if all 4 of those other teams are really good. There should be a game there that you can potentially win. And also within that, you get the mini bye to prepare for the Lions in there to give you some of that extra rest. And even like the Chiefs at the beginning, right, are bookended by the Buccaneers. That might not be that great. And then after them, it's the Broncos and the Commanders. The Commanders likely won't be all that great either. So you don't find yourself in too many stretches where the things are going to pile on and get worse and worse and worse and feel like you're struggling to tread water because you're playing all these tough opponents. Maybe you don't have a super long stretch of 4 easy games in a row to get on a win streak, but I don't think you're going to find yourself drowning too badly in just really, really good opponents back to back to back to back that your team can't find positive things to be able to hold on to and sneak a win or two to break up any potential losing streak in there. So just feels like a lot of favorable moments and structures to this Bears schedule that I want to take some time to go a little bit more in depth on today as we have more time to do so. So we'd love to hear what you think about the Bears schedule and the different quirks in there. Let us know what you think about the quarterbacks, the rest, the easy games, the hard games. Leave us a comment here on the YouTube channel, Locked On Bears, on Twitter, or in the Locked On Bears Facebook group as well to keep that conversation going. However you do it, just make sure you hit that subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, because that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today and every day. We love all of our everydayers out there. We're working on some special stuff for you everydayers in particular, some special access that you guys are going to be able to take advantage of to get more me and more Locked On Bears as a part of your life. That's going to be closer to the regular season, but it's a tease that we're slowly working out some details here on the back end here on the Locked On Podcast Network. But hope you'll join us again tomorrow as we keep breaking down this Bears offseason. And of course, you have to come back for your next opportunity to bear down.